Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that Down the Crooked Path is researched and recorded in Niagara Falls, Ontario, on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Attawandaron, and the Mississauga of Credit First. This land has been home to Indigenous peoples for thousands of years, and we recognize their enduring connection. We are grateful to share these stories on their lands that carry their histories, and we encourage our listeners to reflect on the past, present, and future of the land they call home. Welcome, wanderers, to Journey Down the Crooked Path, a place where the stories are stranger, the shadows stretch longer, and the things that go bump in the night might just be listening. I'm Amanda Joy, your guide into the eerie, the forgotten, and the downright bizarre. Here, we step off the well-lit roads of Canadian Creepies and venture into the murky corners of history, folklore, and the unexplained, where the whispers grow louder and the truth is never quite what it seems. So let's take a deep breath, watch your step, and whatever you do, don't look back. Once you start down the crooked path, you never know what might follow. Imagine moving to a new place, filled with excitement and hope, eager to start fresh. The uncertainty, the unknown, and the challenges of building something from scratch can be daunting. But what if, amidst the hardships, you encountered something far beyond the realm of ordinary, something supernatural? Tonight we dive into the eerie and chilling tale of the Baldoon Mystery, a story that begins with a family's hopeful relocation to the quiet corner of Ontario, only to find themselves trapped in a whirlwind of unexplained events and paranormal activity. The Baldoon settlement was established in 1804 in southwestern Ontario, near today's town of Wallaceburg. The land was owned by Thomas Douglas, the 5th Earl of Selkirk. Lord Selkirk, a visionary, a philanthropist, aimed to create a prosperous farming community for Scottish immigrants seeking a new life in North America. The Lord sent a group of 15 settlers, including John Thomas McDonald, a determined and hard-working Scottish immigrant, to cultivate the land and build their homes. The settlers faced numerous challenges. The land was covered in dense forests and swamps, making it difficult to clear for farming. Additionally, the settlers had to contend with harsh weather conditions, including brutal winters and hot, humid summers. Lord Selkirk wanted to create somewhat of a mini Scottish Highland, and even brought in sheep. But the herds didn't thrive. They would contract diseases that would spread throughout the herd, and there was little for them to eat. Limited access to supplies and resources was another significant challenge for them. The remote location of the Baldoon settlement meant that obtaining essential goods and equipments was a constant struggle. The threat of disease also loomed large, as the settlers were often isolated from medical assistance and were vulnerable to various diseases. The War of 1812, the Baldoon settlement was significantly impacted by the conflict between the United States and British forces. The war disrupted the settlers' daily lives, as many were called upon to defend their land and support the British military efforts. The constant threat of attacks and the need to protect their homes and families added to the difficult conditions faced by the settlers. After the war, many of the settlers left the area in search of better opportunities. Some of them did stay, one family being that of the McDonalds, and for many years, life was normal and uneventful. That was until 1829, when strange events started to happen in the McDonald's homestead. The farmstead of John T. McDonald was a modest yet sturdy structure, typical of the early 19th century rural architecture. Primarily built from locally sourced timber, the house featured a simple design with a pitched roof and small windows. The interior was functional and utilitarian, with a central hearth that served as the heart of the home. By many accounts, the first paranormal event took place one day when a group of young women were in the barn weaving straw hats. Suddenly, one of the poles of the barn came crashing down. Thinking nothing of it, the women continued to work. Then a second beam fell down. Now the men came running to the barn, and they closely examined the beams, its footing, and the roof, but they couldn't find any reason that would have caused the beams to collapse. So everyone just went back to work. A short while later, a third beam crashed to the floor. By this point, the women were so scared that they fled the barn and ran into the house. Luckily, nobody was injured. This was just the beginning of what would be a plethora of your typical haunted house occurrences. It seemed like the McDonalds had a ghost. E-I-E-I-O. From that day on, the farmhouse was plagued with strange noises, the most common being the sound of marching. Often throughout the property, the family and friends and hand workers would hear the rhythmic footsteps of invisible groups. This would echo through the farmhouse, usually during the night, and often sounded like it was coming from the kitchen. It really did sound like a group of soldiers marching. Everyone would run to the kitchen or outside to the fields to search for the group of men, but no one was ever seen, and the marching would suddenly stop, only to start back up the following evening. This would last for months. Perhaps the most terrifying event was one that involved an infant child. Nestled soundly in their cradle, a young babe was sleeping. Suddenly, the cradle started to move as if it was being rocked by an invisible person. The rocking became more and more aggressive. 3 men rushed to the cradle, using all their strength to stop the movement, but they couldn't. Whatever was rocking the cradle was stronger than these men's combined strength, and terrified, they backed away, watching in sheer horror as the cradle continued to rock on its own. Lithobelia, also known as stone-throwing devil, refers to a phenomenon where stones and other objects are mysteriously thrown by an unseen force. The term originates from a 17th century folktale told by Richard Chamberlain, which describes events that supposedly took place in 1682 in the Greatland, present-day Newcastle, New Hampshire. During that summer, thousands of stones rained down on the tavern owned by George Walton. The events were attributed to witchcraft and supernatural forces, as no one was ever seen throwing stones. The word lithobelia itself comes from an ancient Greek festival where participants would throw stones at each other as part of a ritual. The most frequently reported incident involves lithobelia. Rocks and lead bullets were often thrown at the McDonald house, resulting in broken windows. The perimeter of the house was littered with stones, rocks, and bullets and round bits of lead. One witness claimed to have been standing in the McDonald's kitchen when a stone came flying through the window, striking him in the chest. The family and neighbors would collect these rocks and bullets and mark them. They would take these items and toss them into a nearby creek off of the property. Days later, the marked bullets and stones would come through the window or could be found around the property. It got to the point where McDonald's stopped replacing the glass in the windows and opted to just board them up instead. A quote courtesy of the Wallaceburg and District Museum from one Reina Siwa spoke of the incident. He said, "I saw the balls which came through the window and would tie them in a small bag, which was watched by about 30 men, and in minutes we would examine the bag, and to our surprise, not a ball would be left in it. I also saw that the lead was taken out of the cairn, without a thread of the cairn being disturbed." Another account was from a neighbor, W.L. Burnham. He was 16 years old at the time of these events. He said, "I have been present when the balls come through the windows. I and others have picked them up and put a private mark upon them and thrown them in the river. And in a short time, the same balls so marked would come back through the window. At other times, stones would come, wet, as if they had just come out of the riverbed." No explanation for this was ever found. During the height of these events, mysterious fires plagued the McDonald property. These fires would inexplicably ignite in various locations around the farm, often starting without any apparent cause. The McDonald family and their neighbors would find themselves constantly battling these spontaneous blazes, which seemed to erupt at the most inconvenient of times. These fires would pop up all at the same time. When one fire was doused, another would rise somewhere else on the property. Despite their best efforts to investigate and understand the source of these fires, no rational explanation could be found. Burnham also testified to this as well, stating, "Fires would start up in different places at the same time, and when this was extinguished, it would start in another place, and so on until January 1830, when the buildings were burnt to the ground." Over the course of such activities were stereotypical haunting demonstrations. Many family members and neighbors would often see objects fly across the property, especially inside the home. Soap and laundry items would float across the room. A quote from one H. Drulard, again courtesy of Wallaceburg and District Museum, states, "I went with my father to see what was going on at Baldoon, for I was very young at the time. We saw a pot rise from the hearth and chase a dog outside and all around the yard. It could not get away from the pot, for it would hit the dog and he would yell and howl with all his might. I saw an old-fashioned butcher knife pass through a crowd of 50 men and strike the wall the whole length of the 10-inch blade. This happened in 1830. Things and shapes would rise from the floorboards like ominous mist. Other times, it shaped something in the form of an indigenous man, or a white man, or sometimes even a black dog. This black dog was most commonly witnessed during these times when other events were happening. It had been seen sitting on top of the homestead during a fire. People tried to scare the dog off and remove it from the roof, but it just barked and bared its teeth. It stood in the middle of the fire until it vanished into thin air. The strange occurrences at the McDonald farm quickly drew attention and curiosity, turning the Baldoon Mystery into a well-known phenomenon. Newspapers began publishing stories about the mysterious happenings, detailing the bizarre and frightening experiences of the McDonald family. As reports of the unexplained events circulated, they drew attention from both nearby residents and individuals from other regions. Recognizing the potential for tourism, advertisements promoting the area as a destination for those interested in witnessing the supernatural events firsthand started to appear. The McDonald farm became so popular an attraction, with visitors hoping to catch a glimpse of the strange phenomenon themselves. At first, the family encouraged these visitors, hoping someone could help them find a solution. But after 3 years, the household members were growing tired of the constant assault they were under in their own home. So they did what any reasonable family would have done. They moved. John McDonald decided it was best to move his family in with his father, hoping that a change in environment would provide relief from the strange and terrifying occurrences they had been experiencing. The McDonalds packed their belongings and left their farmhouse, seeking solace and safety at John's father's home, which was not too far away. But to the family's shock and horror, the events followed them there too. Maybe it wasn't the property that was haunted, maybe it was the family. Now it was necessary to proceed with additional measures. McDonald went to a local priest for advice. This priest agreed to perform an exorcism on the house. But despite the priest's best efforts, nothing changed. Word of these events had begun to travel and captured the attention of a would-be ghost hunter from Michigan named Robert Baker. He attempted to do a clearing or cleansing of the home, but this too didn't yield any results. What did happen was Baker was charged by the local authorities with witchcraft. Baker was convicted and sentenced to a year in prison. However, he appealed to the lieutenant governor and was subsequently granted a pardon. There are no records of what happened to him afterwards. So how did this all come to an end? Accounts vary on this, but it is generally believed that the family consulted a woman who was said to have the gift of sight. McDonald traveled with a Methodist minister named McDorman to Long Point to meet with a man named Dr. John T. Troyner. Apparently, Troyner's daughter was a psychic. She believed that the family and the property was cursed by an old woman. She said she could see an old woman who lived in a long, low house, and that this woman wanted to drive the family away. McDonald said that he had an idea who this woman was. He had had an argument with a woman and her sons who wanted the property back in the 1820s. The daughter goes on to say that this woman is a witch who could turn herself into birds, and asked McDonald if he had seen any strange birds around the property, to which he said he had. There had been a black-headed goose that had recently joined his flock. The daughter said, "This is the woman. You could stop her with a silver bullet. Hit the goose with the silver bullet and it would disappear, and the woman would also be injured." Once home, McDonald walks along his property till he comes across the black goose. Armed with a silver bullet-loaded shotgun, he shoots the goose, hitting it in its wing. Just as the girl said, the goose disappeared. He then walked over to the woman's house, and there she is, and her arm is in a sling. It is said that after these events, the paranormal occurrences just stopped. Perhaps what makes this story so interesting is not just the large number of events that happened, but how many witnesses there were. From W.L. Burnham to an indigenous hunter named Solomon Parting-Sung to L.A. McDonald, there were over about 26 witnesses. By all accounts, John T. McDonald was a very respected and reliable person. There are numerous and consistent testimonies that lead to credibility of these events, making it difficult to debunk. Despite the passage of time, the story continues to intrigue and mystify, drawing attention from both historians and ghost enthusiasts. Newspapers still publish articles recounting the eerie events that plagued the McDonald family, ensuring that the legend remains alive in public consciousness. The area has become a popular destination for tourists and ghost hunters alike, eager to explore the site of the mysterious occurrences, perhaps experience a brush with the supernatural themselves. As the Baldoon Mystery continues to fascinate, it firmly holds its place in Canadian folklore and history.
That was an eerie journey down the crooked path with Amanda. How cool was that? If you loved it, don't forget to follow Down the Crooked Path on Instagram and TikTok. Amanda shares some really fun interactive content over there, and trust me, it gets even creepier. Down the Crooked Path is our sister podcast, and you can catch new episodes every Thursday wherever you get your podcasts. So if you're into the paranormal, folklore, and strange little corners of the world, we've got you covered. Thank you to Kyle McDonald for editing and composing our theme song.